What does it mean to emerge? What does evolutionary emergence mean? My consulting company, my coaching business is called Evolutionary Emergence Coaching. What does that mean? It's, I think, the most profound, significant principle I can imagine in certain ways. What is evolution? Evolution is all of reality, the unified field, the unmanifest well of pure potentiality, possibility, exploding into manifestation and moving very slowly over time toward higher levels of wholeness, greater, more complexity, more intimacy, more profound, intimate relationships. How do I know this? Well, here we are, right? It's like 13 billion years ago, there was nothing like what we see today. We can't even, it's hard to imagine. There were quarks, right? It was just quarks and subatomic particles that quickly came together at some point and formed atoms, and atoms formed molecules, and molecules formed macromolecules. And so then you had the world of matter for billions of years swirling around the four fundamental forces: gravity, the strong and weak nuclear force, electromagnetism, but gravity being a huge one, right? But so you have the Big Bang exploding, and then you have all these forces driven by the most fundamental force, which is Eros. Eros is that fuels everything, that feeds everything. Eros is the force that binds everything and draws everything back into an intimate communion, into higher coherence. Okay, so this process formed galaxies, right? And galaxies, within galaxies, around certain stars, you have planetary systems, right? Solar systems. And within our system, we have a bunch of planets, and one planet was at just the right degree of closeness and farness, right? So it's not too close, not too far, and it's just the right size where life actually, the experience of being on planet Earth and the level of matter intensified so much that there was a bursting forth, a new Big Bang that birthed life, right? And it was then gradually, life complexified, more intimate connections, deeper relationships, greater wholes that eventually formed, right, plant life, animals, and just kept complexifying, right? The complexification of life meant that the physical structure of the organisms within their embedded environment became more and more complex, right? The brain of a dog is more complex than an ant, right? And the entire brain and nervous system of an ape is more complex than a dog. And our bodies are more complex than anything else that we know of, actually. Our bodies are more complex than anything that we know in the entire universe. And so with that complexity, physical complexity, simultaneously comes consciousness, deeper consciousness, more self-reflection, a greater capacity to, in this world, to have more freedom, more to create, more creativity comes from it, right? And language, in our case, there's more sophisticated language. And within the human world, each of us, right? And by the way, none of this, it's not about individuals only complexifying, it's individuals embedded within a field of complexifying infrastructure, complexifying systems, complexifying social systems with more distinctions between things, clarification of what's this, what's that, what's this, what's that, and the relationships between things. And so tribal societies were very connected to the earth, yes, and They were simpler. They were simpler. The human was less able to have agency in the human's life. There was less power, actually. There was an embeddedness and an intimacy with Earth, yes, and with the animals and plants. But the nature of evolution always yearns for more wholeness, for more creativity, more consciousness, more complexity, more intimacy. And so we were never meant to stay in small bands of tribes. We just weren't. Because the human spirit wants to expand and explore and deepen and solve problems that come up, right? When my whole tribe gets wiped out by a storm, I want to rebuild and think a little bit better about how do we adapt to this environment, right? If the food becomes scarce, oh, well, we're gonna find ways to, instead of just letting my children die of starvation, we're gonna look for ways to have a little bit more predictability, to be in tune with the cycles of nature, so that we can, and we discover, oh, when we take this little piece of this plant that falls down and we put it in the ground and we add some things to it, it suddenly, actually over time, it grows and we can eat from it. Oh, well, if that's the case, then why not make more of it? And if I can feed my family in full bellies, wow, consistently, I don't have to be in starvation and abundance mode all the time. I can actually have a little bit more predictability. So now there's a lot of ways that we can tell this story of evolution, cultural evolution, and a lot of people say agriculture was the source of all evil, or a lot of people say industrialization was the source of all evil, or it's like, where do you draw the line and what are you looking at? Every stage of evolution has first of all, it wasn't just an accident. Humans did the best that they could with the agency and the autonomy and the connectedness and the knowledge and the capacity that we could. We did the best that we could, and some people had more power than others, so that what they wanted was actually overpowering everyone else in such a way and we also responded to the challenges of civilization with what we could at any given time. And so there's always the beauty and the dignity and the gifts of evolutionary transformation, of the stages of development, from the pre-industrial, the pre-agrarian kind of horticultural, actually hunter-gatherer, and then there's the horticultural, and then there's agricultural, and then there's industrial, and then there's informational, right? There's the stages of development in the techno-economic base of civilization that developed as our consciousness also developed, right? Now, when technology grew, when industrialization happened, when technology was developed, let's say the steam engine or the gunpowder or the printing press, there were still plenty of people using that technology that were barbaric. And I don't mean that, what I mean by that is people that actually were egocentric and only looked out for themselves. So they were able to use that same technology to rape and plunder, right? So the explorers are the colonialists, and there was also a worldview at a certain time where my empire, there's the age of empires, that actually my empire has the best of everything, and we want to expand and get more, consume more, to be able to perpetuate the best of what we have, our culture, our art, our civilization. And so at the same time, you have explorers that some of them were mature, and most of them didn't know anything outside of their own culture. So they would go out to the Americas, they would go out to the Pacific Islands, and they would approach beautiful new lands and think of it as like, wow, the only thing we know is what we have back home, which, is we can take these resources and build things and create, and we're creative, right? We can create civilization, we can create order, we can build towns, we can do agricultural settlements. And so that's what they were thinking of. And then they saw these people that looked so different from them. They've never imagined that, never ever seeing another, let's say, dark-skinned person, or a person in loincloths, or people with bows and arrows. And imagine there's no reference point. Today we look back and we say, oh, bad colonialists, bad imperialists, because with over time, we can actually look and we can see, and we've evolved our consciousness and our conscience to be able to see, oh, that was a lot of what they did was wrong. At the time, they actually believed that they were right. And let's be honest, in some situations, they probably were. In some situations, they did bring a sense to the people where they ultimately conquered. They brought a sense of, oh, there's a coherent, loving, benevolent God. There's a oneness there's a grand order to the cosmos. Not that they didn't also experience that at the time, many people. But in any case, there is the kind of the great wisdom traditions, which also happen to be imperialist. They brought something to the worlds that they conquered, disease being one of them. And could they have done it differently? Absolutely. And they didn't know, and maybe some of them knew, and the ones that knew and fought against it and said, no, we got to do it a better way, they were slaughtered, or they died, or they couldn't survive in whatever way. So today we have a responsibility to make sure that the value of inclusion, and especially the marginalized and the vulnerable and the weak, we actually make sure that they're protected. So where am I going with all this? It's helpful to realize that the mistakes, in other words, human history is not, oh, we did something and it all went wrong. Everywhere it went wrong, we can now go back, we can learn from that, and it's a spiral. Evolution's a spiral. As we return to, for example, the indigenous, there's a big wave. This is a great example. There's a big wave in culture to reclaim indigenous wisdom. And so there's this spiral. We're coming back around. We're asking ourselves the question as a culture, how do we relate to indigenous tribes, indigenous wisdom, indigenous rituals and practices, especially when many of them were decimated and they're gone or almost gone. And so that's great. So how do we integrate that? But that's not enough. It's not enough to say, well, we just need to we need to heal our wounds from the colonization efforts over time, and that's going to solve all of our problems. It's not going to solve all of our problems. We also have to lift up the good that came from industrialization, came from even the age of empires. And we have to weave it together into a coherent narrative where everyone belongs, everyone contributes to the larger unfolding of the human story. And so evolutionary emergence. So evolutionary emergence means we each recognize that we are part of this whole, WHOLE. We are an expression of the unfolding of evolutionary love. By evolutionary love, I mean the eros that moves everything towards higher, greater wholeness, deeper interconnectivity, greater intimacy. And so we recognize that. And so what we do is we take the pieces, different parts, different perspectives, and we weave them together into a larger coherence. So in our personal lives, we can go within ourselves and look at the parts of ourselves that are split off, the parts of ourselves that are disconnected, alienated, repressed, and we weave those together. And so I, for example, I have a chronic pain condition, fibromyalgia. And so one of my practices is evolutionary healing. And by that I mean every day doing whatever I have learned to do to bring coherence and flourishing to my body, and be listening for what's needed in any moment. So maybe I need to add a supplement here. Maybe I need to do a different exercise regimen here. Maybe I need to rest more here. And, or for example, other things, for example, my own desire to make money and create flourishing in my own life, I wouldn't want to split off. So if I split off from that, then I say, oh, money's not important. That doesn't matter. I don't need money. Money's bad or whatever. That actually takes away my power. Now I can be bigger than that. I can realize that money is just one currency that enables energy to flow. But that ultimately, what I want to be doing is giving my greatest gifts to whatever's most needed in my sphere of influence. And that actually is the greatest currency, the greatest flow of energy. Now, this can happen in interpersonal relationships. What is evolutionary emergence in interpersonal relationships? Let's say there's someone that we're living with that we rub the wrong way, right? We get irritated by. Someone pisses you off, someone upsets you. You have a grudge with someone. Well, there's a disconnection, there's a dissociation, there's a splitting off, there's an alienation. Evolutionary emergence would be to first recognize what did I contribute to this dynamic, and then engage the dynamic with the deepest intention, not the egoic intention to be right, to overpower, to force my opinion, to make the other person look bad, but the deepest intention, the evolutionary intention, to participate in the weaving together of separate parts toward a greater whole. So the desire for both of us to be flourishing and participating in a larger flourishing system. That's the evolutionary intention. And so I would go to that relationship and I would share my intention and be honest about what's coming up for me, what happened, acknowledging my responsibility and listening for whatever they have to say, and to actually come into an intimacy with the other person. Right? And that creates a larger whole. You see, the relationship itself is the larger whole. And then beyond the relationship, as it ripples out to the people that are affected by our relationship, that continues to be evolutionary emergence. Right? When there's coherence between people within a larger system, it creates the conditions for emergence to happen, meaning something new that cannot be predicted or expected, but that is needed, that is desired, that is an expression of the potency, the possibility, and the desires within the system. Now, how is evolutionary emergence within an organization? Let me take a drink here. Evolutionary emergence within an organization means that an organization is formed because there is a need in that area, and the people that come together to form that organization have the capacity to meet that need. Right? There's an innovation, there's a technology, there's a service, there's a knowledge, whatever it is. And so the organization is formed to enable that need to be met in society. That's what an organization is. And so evolutionary emergence would be to listen to the system so that there's a clarification of what the need is and what is the capacity of those involved, and to be weaving together each individual's gifts, greatest unique gifts, for the sake of this larger whole, which is the organization, which is in service to a larger whole, which is the needs of society. Okay? And that goes up and down. So the needs of society is the needs of the individual too, right? And so you treat the individual within that organization as a microcosm of society. And so you're wanting to create flourishing and coherence and wholeness and emergence out of every individual, out of the teams, out of the organization as a whole, so that they can most successfully fulfill the needs that they're there to support. So what does that look like practically? It's important to have this as a grounding, as a philosophical framework, so that everything comes out of that. Well, one is specifically there's something called deliberately developmental organizations, where baked into the structure and functioning, the policies, the procedures, the roles and responsibilities is that everybody has tasks and roles they have to fulfill to make things happen. And simultaneously, everyone is required or expected or asked to participate in a reflective learning process, developmental process. And that can be part of the onboarding, that can be part of quarterly meetings, that can be part of team development sessions, leadership training. And so that's one way to do it. Another one would be to invite an evolution of the very governance structure of the organization itself. So, for example, some organizations are run in a sort of, let's just call it an authoritarian way, or like a mafia way. So there's one person that tells everyone else what to do. And evolutionary emergence would be look at that and say, actually, why don't we invest in a structure where power is cascading down so that everyone actually can be in their own domain and fulfill their role in their own domain. So you actually create a hierarchy, right, from that, a hierarchy of responsibilities, of power, of tasks, a bureaucracy, if you will, a structure. Now, if you have that structure and it doesn't seem to be working anymore, it seems to be there's a needing for an evolutionary emergence. It would be an invitation to look at what would it be like to distribute the power laterally so that it's not about simply kind of a military organization cascading down orders and then bringing up information, but actually that information is, there's a free flow of information and there's a distribution of power so that every person within their own domain is free to make decisions without consulting or without requiring supervision or someone from the top to tell them what to do. They actually are free on their own. That's called a self-managing organization. There's systems that there's actually governance structures that are created that already outline this. Holacracy being the most popular one, or the most well-known one, I think. So all this to say, evolutionary emergence coaching means that here my role is to be an evolutionary catalyst and an evolutionary partner to individuals, leaders, executives, organizational systems and teams, and beyond, right? So that evolution is continuing to move and it doesn't get stuck when it needs to move, right? When evolution stagnates, you have abuse, you have waste, you have excess, you have all sorts of mental breakdown, right? You have organizational breakdown and failure to succeed in whatever the role in their the work that they're doing. So that's one way to describe it. Now, last thing I'll say is evolution is messy. That's precisely the way it works. And so in order to participate in evolution, we have to be comfortable with the messiness. And of course, the messiness lives alongside the order. Part of what evolution is chaos and order, kind of dancing with each other. And as we dance in chaos and order, actually evolution growth happens. So we need to be able to do that. And accept that it's also a long-term game. Evolution is a long-term process. It jumps. Martin Luther King says the arc of justice is long, but the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. While the arc of evolutionary transformation is long, but it bends towards more wholeness, more integration, more connectivity, more creativity, complexity, intimacy. So that's what I'll say for today. And that was fun. And may your own life be filled with the pulsating evolutionary impulse, the impulse to evolve, to be more, to be bigger, to be more authentic, be more creative, to be more autonomous and connected. Thank you.